Hello, my name is Kerry and I'm a peak performance coach, and one of the areas I specialize in is bereavement coaching. And today we're going to be speaking about men and grieving, and how there definitely is, I think, more pressure put on men because our society kind of expects them not to be able to speak about their emotions. The whole month of June, I'm going to be doing a theme on bereavement. So I'm going to be speaking about different topics, and I'm interviewing different people as well on their take. So I hope that you find this video of huge benefit. I have a very special guest today. It's my husband, Mike, and he's going to be speaking about how he experienced the loss of our younger daughter, Kerry. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Sherry. I'm looking forward to sharing my experience and my journey to help men and their partners, because I think this is where we as men impact people, it's particularly our partners, in their journey, and to help them overcome those obstacles. So I've thought that what I'll title my journey is From Dad to Mad and Back to Man. So that's basically what I'm going to be doing.
And I'd like to just really take this time to honor Mike in being able to share this very personal story on a public platform. But as he said, if we can help just one or two people from, or prevent them from going down the road that we did, then this video would have been very much worth it. So Mike, are you ready just to jump right in?
Absolutely, let's go.
Right, so where did it all start for you?
It started when we realized Kerry was having more and more headaches, and she had just gone back to school, her first day of school in her grade 4 year, and Sherry received a phone call asking her to come and fetch Kerry from school because she had such a bad headache. And from there, Sherry went off to the doctors, and an x-ray was done to see whether there was anything wrong with her sinuses. And from that x-ray, it was determined that she in fact did have a tumor on her pituitary gland. So I received a call from Sherry at the office telling me this, that a tumor had been diagnosed. So I immediately grabbed my things and rushed out of the office, telling some of the staff what had happened, where I was going. But the one key thing I remember telling them is, don't be kind to me. Because if they were kind to me, it would probably lead to me crying. And you know what it is, men don't cry, or men shouldn't cry, I think is the big thing there. So we really did think that these headaches were going to be solved through this operation. We went to see the brain surgeon, and I had full confidence that this operation would be a success. I mean, why wouldn't it be? She'd have full recovery. We were even planning for caveman day at school, because in grade 4 they have one day where they all pretend they're cavemen. And this would have been great for Kerry, because she'd have come out of the operation, would have had a big bandage around her head, and we had a caveman wig for her to wear. So caveman day was going to happen, and everything would be okay.
Okay, so, and then how do you feel just before the op? In other words, you know, sort of the day or the night before the lead in to the op being the next day?
Well, what we did, we were both making sure that we could get Kerry through to her op with the least possible anxiety. So we were going to do things calmly, keep the normal routine going. So the night before her op, we cooked her favorite meal, which was what we call gancha bones, which are ox bones, and then roast leg of mutton with her favorite veggies, which she absolutely adored. She was a real foodie, Kerry, and I can remember in the sort of week before her operation, she was in the kitchen with me and we were doing some cooking, and then she wanted to smell the different spices in the spice cupboard, but not see what they were. And she'd have her eyes closed and she would smell the spices and then tell me what they were. And she was actually brilliant at this. So yeah, she was a real foodie. So after supper, we put her to bed, and I sat there on her bed, chatting gently to her and really feasting on her little face, her beautiful, innocent blue eyes. I don't know if I had some sort of a premonition that something would go wrong, but I actually don't think so, because we had a perfect life and bad things don't happen to nice people. And so for me, it simply couldn't be that there was anything that was going to go wrong. But obviously, deep down, there was a hint of something could go wrong. And then at this point, she said to me, Kelsey said I might die. She's just being silly, isn't she, Daddy? And I looked at her and I said, of course you won't. I promise you that everything will be okay. And, you know, a dad's promise is sacred to his child. He makes this promise and he will do anything in his power to honor that promise. So it was a very strong promise, and it was everything. You know, dads take care of things. Dads provide. Dads are in control even. And little did I realize how out of my control this would all be. So that was pretty much what we did that first night before she went into hospital.
If I can also just interject, I'm sure that I too made exactly that same promise. As one does, as a parent, when your child is needing reassurance, one of your things is to give them that reassurance. So I think it's important to realize that both of us made the same promise, but the result of that promise was very, very different, or should I say the outcome was very, very different. Okay, so Mike, how did things progress once she was in hospital and she'd had the op? What was your take on things?
Okay, I know that you have spoken about this in your post that you put up a couple of days ago. So for me, we did get her into hospital as calm and quietly as possible. And she went in for the op. It was a very long op. It was about 8 hours long. And when she came around in the evening of the op, we were there, and her eyes were closed. She was heavily bandaged with a bandage around her head for the wound. And we had in fact been told that she may be blind as a result of the operation, but you know, her eyes were closed. And the one thing, Kerry was a very time-conscious child. So when she came around, we were there and we greeted her. Her first words were, "What's the time?" And then, "I want to have a wee." So just showing how time-conscious she was. So we went home very comfortable with the fact the operation had been a success. And the next day, on the Friday, we went back, and she, once again, she seemed fine. Eyes were still closed, but she was conscious. We read her fairy stories, told her little stories. And the one thing that we didn't realize is that she had got a Valentine's card the day that she went in for the operation. It was Valentine's Day, her operation, and she got a little Valentine's card. And we never knew until later who this card came from. But that was her first and last little Valentine's card. And within her room, there were also, all of her class had prepared little get well cards and Valentine's cards and things for her. And these were all pinned up around her room. So we told her these stories. She squeezed our hands. She'd say, "Tell me more," or "Read to me some more." And once again, the Friday passed. We were very confident things were progressing as they should be. And once again, we went back home. The next morning, got to the hospital. Sherry was with Kerry and I took Kathleen off to do some shoe shopping. And I received a frantic call from Sherry saying to please get back to the hospital as soon as possible because Kerry, in fact, had stopped breathing. So Kathleen and I raced back to the hospital, and there Kerry was on a ventilator, and we'd been told that she had been put into a medically induced coma. And I think that doctors do this, and they tell you that you're in a medically induced coma, or they try to go away from the actual issue. Maybe that's just time for you to get used to the fact that there may be really bad news coming. But yeah, we were told that she was in medically induced coma. So once again, we thought, okay, she's in a coma. People come around from these medically induced comas. It's quite a well-known technique to look after people once they've had some serious injuries. So we didn't really think much else of it. And then early on the Sunday morning, we received a phone call from the ICU sister to say that things had really deteriorated and that we needed to get into to the hospital. So we got there, went into ICU, and she was lying under what they call a huggy blanket, which is like a warm air blanket. She was still warm, the ventilator was working, looked like she was breathing, but obviously something was very, very wrong. And we couldn't really accept it, but it was probably, in my mind, in any event, that it was worse than we thought. And at about 5 a.m., I just opened her eyelids with my fingers and looked into her eyes. And I knew then that she had died. I'd been with my father when he died, and there was that same fractured look in the eyes. It's a fractured look, and you know inside your soul that their soul has gone. And so I didn't want to say anything because what do I know? I'm just a layman, and the doctors need to tell us this stuff. So I didn't mention it. I just carried on. And we had told family and to gather as well. So we brought them in, and we went to grab some breakfast in the hotel cafeteria, and hospital cafeteria, sorry, not hotel cafeteria, hospital cafeteria. And on our way to the cafeteria, I bumped into her anaesthetist, who in fact was a very, very good friend of ours. And I said to him, please tell me exactly what is wrong. What is really wrong? And I could see he didn't want to say anything. He almost got like a wild look in his eyes. I can just remember them opening wide like this. And he looked at me, and in quite a hesitant voice, he just said, Mike, there's nothing more we can do. She's dead. And I can still hear those words resonating. They envelop you. They pierce you. They're everywhere and nowhere. You are stunned. It's unreal. You simply cannot comprehend. It's the most awful, awful silence that takes you in. So we were almost immediately asked whether we would consider donating Kerry's organs for organ transplant. And very fortunately, Sherry and I were completely on the same page here, and we agreed to that. And as a result, Kerry gave corneas to some children who can now see. She gave portions of her heart valves to another child whose heart is now beating. And others benefited from her kidneys. So in death, she gave the gift of life. And I'd urge anybody watching here to consider donating their own organs for transplant in due course. It's a wonderful gift that you can give to somebody else.
Okay, so then, Mark, what happened after those decisions that we had made, and we basically left her in the hospital, and we came up the hill to Hilton. What are your memories about those next few hours and possibly day?
Oh, yeah, it was a case of arriving home to an absolute sea of people. Hilton's a very close community, and Sherry had been the swimming teacher for many years. So had coached so many children in her swimming classes. Parents knew us, we knew them, knew the children in Kerry's class, and they had all arrived at our home. And we were really wrapped in a blanket of care. It was a fabulous feeling to feel so enveloped by all of these people. And I can remember at the end of that dreadful Sunday, when everyone had gone and it was just us at home, Sherry and I were in the kitchen, and we hugged each other, and we both said that we were no longer scared of dying. It was, we weren't scared of dying. We had faced death. We knew what it was, and it couldn't be any worse. So from there, we had a couple of days at home, but within, I suppose, a week, I was back at work, throwing myself into work. How well I was doing, I don't know. I doubt very well at all, because you have to insulate yourself. And when staff members would come in and express some sorrow, once again, you want to cry, but you almost feel that you can't cry as a man. You feel you can't cry with every single person who crosses your door. So you put up a hard exterior. And it made me think of when a very good friend of mine had been murdered, and his family were absolutely distraught. And they asked me to step in. So I did everything from contacting the funeral parlor to arranging the funeral service, choosing the hymns, choosing the readings, giving the eulogy. But I had to do that with such a hard exterior. And I know that when I gave the eulogy, it was a very matter of fact, and I just said it. I couldn't allow any emotion to intrude there, but it was all done in a very hard and businesslike way.
Okay, and having been at that funeral with Mark, suddenly there was this man that I almost didn't recognize. Quite businesslike, quite kind of forceful, quite hard, saying the things that had to be said, but in a way where there was absolutely no emotion. And I think maybe it's important to mention at this stage that Mark's a very gentle man, and our relationship up until the death of Kerry was very, very gentle. At that stage, we had been married about, 14 years when she died, about. And our relationship was just very gentle. We were best friends, and certainly what drew me to Mike was the fact that he was a very gentle person. So when I was at Jimmy's funeral and I saw this hard man coming out and doing the eulogy, I didn't really know who he was. Because he was so different from the Mike that I knew. So Mike, when did the trouble start?
So after about 4 months, where we had really been on the same page the whole time and were deeply concerned for one another, supporting one another very well, there started a very quick slide into withdrawal and anger. And we later defined this as what we called monster man. I thought that I was withdrawing to lick my wounds under the cool veranda of a house. In that dark, cool place, no one else there, I would be able to just quietly lick my wounds. But in reality, I was angry and aggressive and disruptive. it was not a good place to be at all. I could not remember things. You inflict pain on your nearest and dearest because they care. They are there supporting you, and because you almost don't know what else to do, or I certainly didn't know what else to do. I'm sure plenty of people do know what to do, but I didn't know what to do. I was inflicting a lot of pain on Sherry. I mean, that sounds bizarre. It really sounds bizarre. So Sherry took brunt of this. I wasn't able to see reality. I became, quite frankly, an absolute asshole, and I alienated family and friends, but most devastatingly, I alienated Sherry. That was, in retrospect, the worst possible thing that I could have done.
So when Mike is describing this monster man, it felt to me as if he was two completely separate people. The gentle Mike that I had known, the gentle father, who still was able to be a little bit gentle with our daughter Kathleen, and then there was this horrendous being that made himself available, and that's why we called his behavior the monster man, because it was so destructive. It was so volatile. It was, I didn't know what was going on. That was making my gentle husband into this monster man. So my question, Mike, to you is, could you feel that there were two completely different components or parts to your personality? When you were with me, you could be monster man, and then were you somebody else when you were with other people?
Well, I think the thing is that you wear masks, and the mask that I wore for you wasn't a very nice mask, but I could put on another mask for other people, for the world outside there, and the masks do help. We all need masks to an extent, but when they become too dominating and too intrusive, then you have masks that are dysfunctional. They actually are harming masks more than anything. The wearer of the mask, of course, can't see this. They're quite unaware of the mask, but it is a bad thing. And inside, you die little bit by little bit, but all the time you're living that mask. You live on the outside of the mask because you cannot afford to look inside to what you really are inside there.
Can I just interject? When you said you die a little bit sort of as each day goes on, it was very evident, and family and friends mentioned to me that it looked like, when they looked into Mike's eyes, it looked like his eyes were dead. So that dying of his soul actually was reflected in his eyes and actually in his whole face. It becomes a physical manifestation of what's happening inside. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I suppose it's a little bit like the picture of Dorian Gray. You have the one picture, the nice, kind, gentle person, then there's the absolute monster behind that all. Just to return to the fact that you die, or you can't look at yourself too closely, because if you look at that person too closely, then you fear that you might fracture and split into a million pieces. So there's a fear of looking at yourself too closely. So what then happens is that when you are challenged on the person that you have become, or anything, quite frankly, your old limbic brain comes roaring in. Just to explain, the limbic brain is the primitive brain that we all are born with. It's a primitive brain, and it relates to the fight or flight aspect of your personality. You have a conscious brain, which is the one that you can be in rationally. You can think clearly. It knows the difference between right and wrong. It's empathetic. It can live in the present, but the limbic brain comes in. It really does roar in, and it's our primordial brain, so it's all the worst of us. And it can only think in terms of fight or flight. So if you get flight as your first response, then you are likely to withdraw from the situation. You close down, you don't talk, and you become silent, morose, withdrawn from life, and most importantly, withdrawn from your partner. Then, of course, there is the fight portion. And this is as destructive. In fact, it's probably more destructive than the flight portion. You roar at those who are closest to you, inevitably your partner. All you can think is that anything what they are saying is an attack on you. It's a personal attack, and it's going to the core of you. And you cannot see that it may be a simple inquiry or a helpful comment. All comments, all inquiries, for me in any event, became an attack on me. And so you come out fighting, because if you don't fight, you will die.
So fight and flight happens when you go immediately, when you think that your survival is being threatened. And that's why our brain goes into fight and flight, obviously with all the chemical and neurobiology that goes with that. It's, I think, quite important to know that if you, well, firstly, that as soon as I mention anything to Mark, it would put him straight into that survival mode of fight or flight. And when that happens, as he says, all the roaring and the anger and all of that comes out. But what also happens is, because of the chemicals in your brain, it actually paralyzes your prefrontal cortex, which is this part of your brain. In other words, the thinking, rational part of your brain. So it's not just that Mark was being difficult. In fact, he couldn't act in a rational manner. And that I didn't understand at the time. We obviously, in retrospect, we're all geniuses. But when you are in fight and flight, you cannot expect your partner to act in a logical, rational way. It's physiologically impossible. And so I really just wanted to, hope you don't mind, I just wanted to really make that point, because that is really the core of what was going on in between us. So Mark, what was our communication like during this time?
I think one of the issues that I had is that as a man and as a dad, I couldn't control what was happening. And maybe I'm a control freak, which maybe just exacerbated everything. But in my mind, I was a failure. Many, many times I wanted to say things to Sherry, kind, gentle things, but they were caught here in my throat. They were caught here. I could not get them out. I would sometimes struggle with this. I would try my utmost to get those words out. And no matter how hard I wanted to say them, they wouldn't come out. So this would have made a huge difference had I been able to verbalize these. It would have brought a gentleness and an empathy back to our relationship. But this I just couldn't do. And apparently it is quite a common effect with men. I read a book called Men in Grief, and this inability to verbalize is very, very common amongst men. So I wasn't stepping outside of that picture of a man. In fact, it was reinforced, and I really did battle with that. So just to go back to your initial question, our communication was, I think, one-sided. It was coming from you with very little coming back from me.
Except the anger, the
Except the anger, yeah.
So there was very little empathetic, gentle, loving communication.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Just to mention, the book that Mark referred to, Men in Grief, is a very old book, but an amazing book written by Carol Stardaker. So if you are experiencing grief yourself as a man, or if you, your partners, your brothers, your sons, your fathers are battling, try and get hold of this book, Men and Grief by Carol Stardaker. Okay, so getting back to us. What do you think, Mark, was the initial cause that kind of flipped you into that permanent state of fight or flight?
I really think that, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'd made this promise to Kerry. I promised her everything would be okay. And that promise really came back to haunt me. I was a failure because I had not honored that promise to protect and care for my family. And most men will be like this. It is an honor to be a father, and to fail in that role, even through no fault of your own, is all-consuming and pervasive. It sits with you every waking moment, and it invades your dreams even. It's a terrible place to be, but I do think that this promise that I made was something that triggered me and may trigger other men as well. So yeah, that I think was the cause that came back to haunt me.
And I think, as I mentioned before, both of us made that promise to Kerry. But because I'm not the dad, my societal role is not to protect and provide and solve all the problems and make sure my family is safe. For me, it didn't have the same response. And I think this was really vital to causing the unraveling actually of Mark as a person and our relationship, was because of that huge pressure. As a man, that's what you do. And suddenly Mark realized that actually he had promised, but he couldn't do it. So, yeah. So Mark, how were you engaging with the rest of the world at this time?
Well, it felt very much to me as if I were inside an aquarium, swimming around inside an aquarium with thick walls, with thick glass, that I could look out. I could look out at the outside world. I could see them. I could see what was happening, but I could not swim with that outside world. I couldn't swim with family or friends. I couldn't swim with Sherry. It was like I was in a silo, unable to engage other than looking. But there wasn't that feeling of engagement that should have been there.
Yeah, and I think that description came to light when I had said to Mark, you know, I'm tired of trying to get to reach you. For me, there's this huge wall, and it's very high, and it's very thick, and I've been trying to climb over it and under it and around it, and it's a thick concrete wall. There's nothing coming between the two of us. And when I mentioned about that wall, that's when Mark said, actually, no, you're wrong. It's not a concrete wall. And that's when he mentioned the fact that he was in an aquarium. He still needed to see what was going on, but he couldn't engage with it. And I think that many people get locked into that kind of place where they're safe with themselves, but not with they feel safe with themselves, but not necessarily with other people. And it was really quite amazing that about 5 years after we had had this discussion, when Mike went to a kinesiologist, she mentioned that exact same example. She said, in my opinion, what I can see is that you are in an aquarium, there are glass walls, and which I thought was completely amazing. Anyway, so Mark, what was the end of this journey into, as you call it, your madness?
I think a very key part of this was that around 8 or 9 years after Kerry's death, I really lost my mind and I embarked on an affair. I was quite unable to see the consequences of the affair. This was all about me. I was in another silo, a fun silo, one where I did not have to confront the reality of living, of being unable to see the damage that I was causing. And this caused such huge damage. As I'm, excuse me, sorry, as I'm saying these words now, I am dumbfounded by what I was doing. I am dumbfounded that I could not see the consequences. And it did cause such huge damage. Firstly to Sherry and to Kathleen. And they were obviously the most immediately affected because they were living with me. But family and friends were affected by this as well, because now suddenly they were confronted with a couple that they had seen previously as a happy couple together all the time. And now suddenly I was shattering that happiness. I was causing a breach in the fabric of society, I suppose. And that it hurts friends as much as anybody else. And despite having resigned from my job and from leaving home, in reality being kicked out of home, it was still all about me. There was a great relief in being discovered, but it was still within a silo. In effect, my world was not worth anything anymore, and I was ready to throw in the towel on many aspects of life. And another strange thing about this was that despite this adultery, I did not want to lose Sherry. I still loved her deeply, but I simply could not see the pain that I was inflicting. The reality of that pain was absent from me. And I still cannot explain how that can be. But you see, I wasn't confronting what was happening to me. And I think this was the result of the 10 years of not confronting reality. If I go back to that promise that I made to Kerry, I felt empty. I felt distraught. I was filled with negative emotions. I had an inability to recall a lot of stuff. There were times when we would have fought all night, horrible fight all night. I would go off merrily to work the next day, whistling, leaving Sherry in a crying heap, either in bed or on the veranda. And then when I got back from work, and Sherry said, "What about that long fight we had all night?" And I was like, "What fight?" I really didn't recall anything. There was a total inability to recall what was going on. And I perceived everything as a personal attack. And then the limbic brain came roaring through, and of course it just degenerated into another fight. But having had the fight, you see it with the flight as well. You actually see it with animals. They will have been attacked and or going out and attacking, and then 2 minutes later they're all calm and they don't remember that initial damage, I suppose. So yeah, that promise, I think, was, once again, it keeps coming through. It's almost like a touchstone throughout this message that I'm trying to get through. But there was this promise that was so huge in all aspects.
And I think, speaking now to the partners of men who might be in a similar process or situation to Mike, initially you can respond with calm and understanding. And from my side, I knew that the death of Kerry was behind all of this really strange behavior of Mike's. But when it carries on for year after year after year, eventually you get worn down as well. And eventually I was being able to I probably also went into survival mode. And I also shouted and screamed. I still feel embarrassed at what our neighbors would have possibly heard. Because there was absolute frustration that this very intelligent husband of mine could not see things in reality, that the arguments we were having and the decisions that he was making were completely irrational, to the point where actually I thought that he had a fractured or split personality. That was how powerful the difference was between the man I knew and the man he had become. And the frustration for me was that no matter how much I was trying to reach him, possibly help him, which was maybe the wrong thing to do, I wasn't managing to do that. I was being blocked by that big wall. I was being held at bay. I was being held outside. And so the result of the years and years and years of this abusive behavior was eventually our marriage was almost a non-marriage, because nothing can withstand being battered so much for so long and having no little bits of empathy to help the relationship just nurture itself or to grow. And I think this applies not, in our case, there was no physical abuse, but I think when men are in physical abuse, or the women, they're in a physically abusive relationship, it's the same process. The men go straight into fight and flight, and then instead of maybe just being very volatile and emotionally abusive, it actually comes out as physical abuse. So when there's an understanding that the behavior is physiological, and I'm not making excuses for the behavior, but it is physiologically caused, that understanding can contribute hugely to the healing of a relationship between partners. So, Mike, did you end up going to any kind of therapy, and did it help at all?
Yes, from fairly soon after Kerry's passing, I went to therapy, and over the next 12 plus years, I saw 4 different therapists, and the first 3 were totally taken in by my masks, my ability to project that everything was okay, that the problem could not possibly lie with me. And strangely, these first 3 therapists made no mention of the limbic brain, which to my mind is a big key to understanding what went on. And then, thank goodness, in 2014, we found a fabulous therapist right here in Hilton, who literally took me from the bottom of the barrel, and through her skill, I was able to start living a conscious life. How to be in the moment, how to show emotion, and there I mean the right type of emotion, not the shouting, screaming, roaring type of emotion. And that emotion wouldn't tear me apart. It was okay. And also that I need not fear confronting what had happened. And probably most importantly, that I didn't have to be perfect. And through her, we were introduced to a wonderful, wonderful couple called Heidi and Yumi Schleifer. And Sherry has interviewed Heidi Schleifer before today. They come from the USA, and they ran a 3-day workshop called Adventures in Intimacy that we attended in Johannesburg. And I can honestly say that this workshop was life-changing for me and for us. It was the most amazing, amazing workshop. You will, if you have seen Sherry's interview with Heidi Schleifer, you will know that she uses a technique called the bridge to enable couples, people, to engage with one another's worlds. We each live in different worlds, And in fact, the way that we live is sometimes a bit like a Venn diagram. There's my world, there's your world, and then there's the world where we do intersect. But those individual worlds are very, very strong, and it requires quite a lot of understanding from the partner or friend who's engaging in this process to understand what is going on in that alien world, I suppose it is. So the technique of the bridge is to invite the other person into your world. They cross the bridge with no baggage. They bring nothing with them other than maybe their passport to cross that bridge. And they come into your world, and they adopt an inquiring mind as to what your world is like. And they ask you questions about your world. And they continue asking questions. And through the process, they will say, and tell me more, and tell me more. And this actually enables you to engage with a lot of stuff that may have remained hidden. And through the process, you start discovering your own world as well, for that matter. And then you're able to share that with a lot of detail with that partner, and gives them a great sense of knowledge of what that world is. And then once you've been through that particular process, it gets reversed. A day or so later, you can go through that same process with the partner inviting you into their world, and you then repeat the process with them, and you start to understand their world.
What we'll do is we'll put the link to this interview at the end in the credits of this video, so that you can go and have a look at her describing, particularly with regard to grief, about this amazing process called the bridge. You can also have a look on her TED Talk. If you just put in Heidi Schleifer TED Talk, the bridge, it'll get you there. Amazing lady, and she certainly contributed a lot to helping us to heal and to find each other again. So Mike, what finally made you turn your life around and decide actually to go and see this psychologist and pull our lives together again?
Well, I think it was extensive, deep therapy with this final psychologist or therapist. As I say, she is a wonderful, wonderful therapist. And she was able to get me to a place of being conscious, living consciously most of the time. And the biggest gift I could give to anybody is to ask them to try to live a conscious life. One in which you think carefully about things. You're conscious of your partner. You actually rarely see them. You rarely see situations. And you can focus on leading a really decent life, a kind life, an empathetic life. If I use the analogy, you would sometimes phone a call center, and the call center agent, you get really irritated with them. But if you're living a conscious life, you realize they are not the cause of the problem. And if you are kind to them, it will help you, because you won't have all of these terrible cortisols flooding your system and making you angrier and angrier. And they can feel appreciated as well. And in the same way, if you are living a conscious life with your partner, then you are conscious of them all the time, and you make conscious choices to be kind, gentle, empathetic, to engage, to listen. That's also a very important one, to be able to listen without responding necessarily. Yeah, I would suggest to people that listening is a huge skill. So develop that conscious listening, which is really hearing what people are saying without thinking about the reply, rather than listening to what's being said.
And I think from a partner's perspective, very often when your partner is living in an unconscious way, it leads to you feeling invisible. You feel that you are not seen or heard, because actually you are not seen or heard, because he is wrapped up in that silo where he can only see himself and what he's doing, and doesn't think further than that. So if part of your relationship problem is that you're feeling ignored, this may well be the reason that that they're still being unconscious and not conscious. And the change between the being unconscious to conscious is absolutely remarkable. So well done. Mike, coming towards the end of this interview, what would you advise other men, for whatever reason, that might find themselves in this scenario of being caught up in fight and flight, in the monster man behavior?
The first thing is to be able to acknowledge some things. And the first is to acknowledge that you may need some help. And there's nothing wrong or scary about acknowledging that you need some help, but to go and seek that help. And in seeking that help, be completely honest. Don't try to hide things. Be absolutely frank and honest with yourself, firstly, and with the therapist. And then within your own relationship, you must really, really focus on that relationship. Focus on the other person. Make sure that you do small acts of kindness every day. You practice acts of love. If you can, Sherry and I both work from home, so we can pop into each other's offices, we can give each other a hug during the day, we can write little notes, but wherever you can, do those little acts of love. Practice kindness. Practice being conscious, and look carefully where you are, where your partner is, and very importantly, what you need to do and what your needs are as well. And you need to verbalize these to live a conscious life. And through living a conscious life, you can overcome a huge amount.
Mark, my final question is there anything else that you would like to add about anything that we've spoken about today?
Well, I think first of all, I want to thank you for doing this interview with me, and I really hope that this interview is able to help men out there, but also to help their partners, because so much harm can be done unwittingly. And if through this interview we have been able to share some stuff with the audience out there, I think it'll help them enormously in their own relationships.
No, absolutely agreed. And I'd also like to thank Mark for being so brave and courageous in really opening your heart, and in fact in opening our relationship to the public, in the hopes that just the realization or the things that we've spoken about will be helpful to you. If you would like to make contact with me, I will, at the end of this video, have my email address, my website, and I would welcome you to do that, so that we can prevent you guys from maybe having to walk the very long and very difficult road that we did. So well done to Mike. I love you so much.
Thank you.